So here we are in Mezhibozh, in this incredibly beautiful old cemetery full of really old gravestones, and then this ohel, this sanctuary that has been built for the Ba'al Shem Tov. The Ba'al Shem Tov, whoever he may have been historically, we know that he has, through spiritual imagination, just captivated the hearts and souls of so many Jews throughout the generations. And here he is.
Good question. Who was the Ba'al Shem Tov? The Ba'al Shem Tov was, I think that, we could start on many different spheres because he meant many things to many people then, and I think he means many things to many people today. On the one hand, I think the Ba'al Shem Tov was, we can call him a messenger, who brought a message to the Jewish people, a messenger to bring, at a time when the Jewish people needed, probably more than ever in our times, needed something, someone, somehow, that was going to bring a positive message to the Jews.
When I think of the Ba'al Shem Tov, when I think about the Shem Tov for me, and I can't imagine my life without the Ba'al Shem Tov. And I can't imagine my life without the Torah and the teachings that he's brought into the world. When people ask me about my teacher, my direct teacher, Reb Shlomo Carlebach, what did Reb Shlomo give me? So I like to say that one of the things that he gave me was he gave me a pair of new eyes. Of new eyes how to see the world, of new eyes how to interact with people, of new eyes how to learn, of new eyes how to formulate my relationship with the master of the world. So when I think of the Ba'al Shem Tov, I can say all of that.
Many of the stories that are told about him, or the letters, they're obscure, they're esoteric. That's fine. But on a broader level, the gift was to give to everybody. That this was something for everybody, and that every Jew is precious, and every Jew has dignity, and every Jew said, I'm descended from King David. I'm descended from the prophets. Look how important I am for this world. Look what I can do for this world. Look what God needs from me. Look how I can help God. That's, I think, what the Ba'al Shem Tov gave to us.
Perhaps no other figure in the last 500 years has had as great an impact upon the Jewish imagination as Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer, known as the Ba'al Shem Tov. Today there's hardly a place on earth that has not been touched by his legacy of Hasidism, the mystical movement that he began almost 300 years ago. But how did this apparently uneducated folk healer and mystic of obscure origins achieve so much in such a short time? Why is it that so many people, over 250 years after his death, continue to talk about him as if he were still present? It's a question I've asked myself. For like so many others, the Ba'al Shem Tov is someone very real to me, someone whose stories and teachings continue to touch me personally. But why? Why do we still feel this way about a man who lived so long ago? It was to answer these questions that I decided to go in search of the Ba'al Shem Tov, traveling around the world, talking to scholars and teachers of Hasidism, going to Ukraine to visit the graves of his descendants and his own grave in Mezhibozh, hoping to discover how he changed the face of Judaism and how he had changed me.
The Ba'al Shem Tov lived from 1700 to 1760. And it was a period of great turmoil among the Jews in Poland, which included almost all of Ukraine. In 1648, 1649, there were horrendous pogroms. Many Jews got displaced. And as a result, the religious level of education plummeted, and the economic status of the Jews plummeted. And also, at the same time, there was a false messiah, Shabtai Tzvi, who caused the turmoil in the spiritual and religious aspect. So it was a time of great distress when the Ba'al Shem Tov was born and afterwards.
The Ba'al Shem Tov was born Israel, son of Eliezer, in the Ukrainian city of Okup, near the Ottoman-Turkish border at the beginning of the 18th century. The first story we hear of him is one of loss. For when he was only 5 years old, already deprived of his mother, his father called him to his deathbed and said, "My son, I will not live to see you grow to manhood, but you must promise to remember, God is with you always, and you are to fear nothing other than God."
And essentially that was one of his last will and testament to his son before leaving this world, is to serve God and be in awe of God, but not of people. And then his father passed away, and even though he was still just a child, he would go out into the fields and he would pray. And when he would pray, wolves would come and other animals would come. And normally a little child would be scared because he's in the forest alone, there's wild animals. But he wasn't. He remembered what his father said, not to be afraid of anyone, no man, nobody but God. And he would just pray, he would just keep going. And then the animals would come and listen to him. He sang sweetly, and by the time he finished praying, there was like a circle of animals. This is again, it's not, the question is not the historical story of whether how many animals gathered for the minyan with the Ba'al Shem Tov, but it's the idea that we want to convey of who the Ba'al Shem Tov was.
The Ba'al Shem Tov was orphaned at an early age. Some sources say 3, some 5. And he was taken care of by some townspeople. And he was going to cheder, to religious school, elementary school, but he kept on running away into the woods. And they would catch him and bring him back. He'd run away again until they gave up. So what this prefigures, the teaching of Judaism in those times was rote and rough. They would slap the kids, rap them on the knuckles. And he ran away from that. So this prefigures his departure from the conventional rote teaching of Judaism.
So the Ba'al Shem Tov began to wander from town to town, praying to God in the fields as he walked. In every place, he learned something new. He took jobs escorting children to and from school. He swept synagogues and learned the healing properties of various herbs. And when he was 18 years old, his prayer had deepened to the point where he began to have mystical experiences. It was at this point that he met his spiritual teacher, Achia Hashiloni, the biblical prophet, with whom he began to learn in a cave deep in the Carpathian Mountains. The traditions tell us that he learned with Achia Hashiloni for the next 18 years, experiencing the deepest mysteries until he was finally ready to receive the great revelation.
He was in the cave, and he goes out, and he sees that everything is one. He'd been at a high level previous to that, but he reached like the pinnacle. Everything is one. See, the mystic teaching is not that God is one, not 5 or 3. The mystic teaching is there's nothing but God. There's only one. There's only one reality. Normally we think that there's God and the world, two realities. The mystics teach the world is also God. So the immanent God and the transcendent God are one. There's only one.
It said when the Ba'al Shem Tov first began to have his spiritual insights, he was like a crazy man. Haya medaber chutz lashita. He would speak in a crazy way. You couldn't get him. You couldn't understand him. And his heavenly teacher, Rabbi Shiloni, who was the teacher of Elijah, came to him and taught him to say the first chapter in Psalms. Blessed are those of the simple path, Ashrei Tmimei Derech, over and over again, so he could come down from the heights and re-achieve simplicity, so he would be able to talk to people. Because when he was in that ecstatic state, he couldn't communicate, and he had to learn that his work was communicating with people. His work wasn't just his own ecstasy, his work was being able to say it in language that people could hear.
So at 36 years old, Israel ben Eliezer was commanded by his teacher to leave his isolation in the mountains and to reveal himself to the world. At first he did so as a traditional healer, what people called a Ba'al Shem, a master of the holy name.
The Ba'al Shem Tov begins his career as a healer, right? Not a scientific healer, at what would have been understood as medical science in those days, but as we might call a faith healer. He had clairvoyance. He could perform what people would call miracles.
When the person who became his successor first came to him, because the Ba'al Shem Tov was known as a natural healer. He knew how to deal with herbs and with other kinds of ways of getting people's bodies to be healthy again. What that meant was that the body wants to be healthy, but sometimes there are blockages, and he knew how to remove them. So the Maggid of Mezhibozh, Dov Ber was his name, came to the Ba'al Shem Tov first in order to be healed. But he also wanted to find out, what does the Ba'al Shem Tov know? Because people said that he had such great awareness, such great deep knowledge. So the Ba'al Shem Tov said to him, do you know this particular text by Rabbi Isaac Luria, who was supposed to be the greatest Kabbalist that we ever had? And he says, yes, I know this one very well. So he says, would you please read it and explain it? And he did. The Ba'al Shem Tov shook his head. So he says, oh, you mean the other opinion? He gives him the other opinion. The Ba'al Shem Tov shook his head. So he says, if you know better, then tell me. He says, stand up. And he stood up. And the Ba'al Shem Tov began to recite the text, and all the realities that this text spoke about became palpably visible to him. When the Maggid of Mezhibozh heard and saw that, then he realized that this was a teacher of an altogether different level than one would expect, and he stayed with him. The Ba'al Shem Tov, in a sense, brought this kind of element back to us, so that by re-enchanting Judaism, people who haven't seen Judaism from that perspective will be able to see it. And that's going to be good, because every religion is a vital organ of the planet. And every religion nowadays needs re-enchantment.
Before setting out for Mezhibozh, where the Ba'al Shem Tov lived most of his life and is buried, I decided to visit the various graves of his heirs, as a kind of preparation for meeting the Ba'al Shem Tov himself. I first went to Uman to visit his great-grandson, the famous Rebbe Nachman of Bratslav, whose grave is one of the most visited pilgrimage sites in all of Eastern Europe. So we are here in Uman, and we are about to go into the Tzion, into Rebbe Nachman's grave here where he was buried. He spent his last few years here, and he
he said that people should come and see him, especially on Rosh Hashanah, and come and be with him and pray with him. And so it's a real holy pilgrimage site. Rabbi Nachman was the great-grandson of the Ba'al Shem Tov, and he was a very, very holy spiritual master and an amazing storyteller. There are stories that he used to tell and stories that are told about him. And he used to say, you know, stories, people tell stories to send you to sleep. Stories are to wake you up. And his stories were really about waking up the soul to really experience the truth. And so many of the prayers that are said at his grave are about opening our hearts to serve in truth, to find our true way to be. So I believe the way in is here. So this here says tzedakah, which is charity, and this says in Yiddish word kvitlich, a little petitionary notes, little prayers, and a couple of people back home have given me little notes that they wanted me specifically to put by Rabbi Nachman. I have two here, I'm not going to tell you who they're from, with little notes, so I'm going to offer these kvitlich into the box. And this is some tzedakah. איך נשיט שאדוני על הבדלך תדבק לשוני לחיכי אם לא אתגלחי אם לא עלי את ירושלים על ראש שמחתי.
In Hasidism, in Kabbalah, there's the idea of a collective soul, meaning somebody who's a leader, who the people who follow him are parts of his soul, are connected to his soul. So the higher or more amazing a leader is, the more different kinds of people he can relate to. So the Ba'al Shem Tov is a collective soul of a massive sort. And people who are intellectuals, non-intellectuals, Orthodox, non-Orthodox, people of every sort can relate to him.
One of the early stories that I remember being told was the Ba'al Shem Tov gave great respect to the Poshet Am, the simple people, people who didn't know anything at all. And it was the origin of the concept of the Hasidic nigun, the wordless chant or the wordless tune. Because he was criticized by Misnagdim especially, but by others who were intelligent and educated. These Pashut people, why do you hang around with them? You know, it's what are they? They're nothing. They don't know anything. And the Ba'al Shem Tov said, but they can daven. They may not be able to open the Gemara or Talmud, but they can daven. And Misnagid would say, but they can't read Aleph Beis. They don't know the alphabet. They can't open up and read it. And the Ba'al Shem Tov said, but they can hum a tune. And this too is davening. He found a value in everyone. And when we talk about midos, that's a warmth. That's an acceptance of everybody on their own level. He was a holy man who could go out and speak to men, women, children, educated, uneducated, rich, poor, royalty, common, Jew, non-Jew, and relate to them and to help them. Many non-Jews came to the Ba'al Shem Tov.
So tell us what you know about the Ba'al Shem Tov, Yuri.
I know there was a great guy, and of course it was 300 years ago. And everybody from this village come to him because he make a good advice and cure people. So young and old come to him, and it was just one move. He put his hands on the head, and after it, people come back health. He make miracles. It was really great guy. Everybody in this village love him too much. He even found a water well, because people need a well for animals, for people. So he go for field with a stick, wooden stick, and show this is be water. Make a hit and water go out from this. For now we can go for this place and look. Until now it's very nice, clean and sweet water. So I know many miracles, but it's main miracles, I think so. So not just Jewish people come to him, everybody come to him. It was very nice and kind man, Ba'al Shem Tov.
Things have changed over the generations, and today there's a criticism of rabbis who speak to women, of rabbis who speak to the uneducated, and they're losing sight of where the Ba'al Shem Tov started. When we're talking about midos, we're talking about a non-judgmental approach, which wasn't the norm in those days.
Serving God wasn't just something of fear, it was more of love. It wasn't something just of Talmud. It was a revolution in simplicity, and that God wanted the heart more than the head, and he wanted prayer more than study. He wanted simple deed more than kind of lofty speech. And that was how it began. The Ba'al Shem Tov was a populist. The Ba'al Shem Tov, he might have had an elite, small core group of people who he taught kind of the inner meaning of the Torah, but to the vast majority he spoke in parables and stories, and he lifted them up.
From my childhood, my mother told me many stories, but I have one which I love the most. Sometimes during Yom Kippur, sometimes just for my relatives or members of congregations, I'm reminding them this story. On Tisha B'Av, the great tragedy day of Jewish history, when 2 temples were destroyed and many not very good events in Jewish history happened around this date. Once on this date he was traveling along the streets of Berdichev, which was known as the capital of Jewish shtetls. And next to the horse carriage, he saw a Jew who was eating. He came next to this person and he asks this person, "Excuse me, do you know what is the date today?" "Oh, yes, I do. Today is Tisha B'Av." "Do you know that Tisha B'Av is a fast day?" "Oh, yes, I do." "Then why are you eating?" "Oh, because I am hungry." Then Ba'al Shem Tov looked up to the heavens and he said, "God, look at this Jew. He could have lied 3 times, but 3 times he said the truth." And I think this is what we can learn, because any act of a human being can be viewed from different angle. What I'm learning from Ba'al Shem Tov and what I'm trying to teach my members of my congregations, that look carefully, look from another angle, find these 3 main true stories which this person would like to tell you. And in this way, if we are bringing the best out of human being, then this best will stay with this person.
So we are entering the forest. This forest is less than an hour away from Mezhibozh. Mezhibozh, the place where we're going to encounter the Ba'al Shem Tov. But who knows, maybe we're going to encounter him right here. Because so many of the Ba'al Shem Tov stories and the Hasidic stories in general take place in the forest. A story is told of the Ba'al Shem Tov that whenever great danger was threatening the Jewish community, the Ba'al Shem Tov would come and he would find a special secret place in the heart of the forest, and in that place he would make a fire in a prescribed and special way. And then there was a prayer whose words, along with the fire and the secret place in the forest, had a power, and a miracle would happen, and the danger passed. Generation moved to generation, and the Ba'al Shem Tov's closest disciple was the Maggid of Mezhibozh, Dov Ber. And the Maggid of Mezhibozh would come to that same secret place in the forest where his teacher had showed him. And in that place in the forest, he would make that special fire in the same way as had been revealed to him by the Ba'al Shem Tov. And then he would look up to heaven and he would say, Ribono shel Olam, Master of the universe, I found this secret place in the forest and I remembered how to light the fire. But I don't remember the words of the prayer. But may this be enough. And it was enough. And once again a miracle would happen and the danger facing and threatening the Jews would pass. And in the next generation, Moshe Lieb of Sasov, the Sasover Rebbe, he too would come to that same secret place in the forest where his teachers had taught him to find. And in that place in the forest, he would stand amidst the trees and look up to heaven and say, Ribono shel Olam, Master of the universe, I have found this place in the forest. But I don't remember the special way to light the fire, nor do I remember the words of that prayer. But let this be enough. And it was enough. And once again, a miracle would happen and the danger would pass. Generation moved to the next generation. And the fourth generation was Rabbi Israel of Rizhin. Israel of Rizhin, the Rizhiner Rebbe. And he would sit in his living room in an armchair. And gazing up to the heavens, he would say, Ribono shel Olam, Master of the universe, I have forgotten the words of the prayer, and I don't know how to light the fire, and I cannot even find the place in the forest. But I do remember the story, and please God, let that be enough. And it was enough, and the miracle happened, and the danger passed. Remembering the story and the legacy of the story is all that we really have. We have so many amazing stories, but perhaps we don't know how to find the secret places in the forest or know how to light the fire, but we can imagine. We can allow the landscape of the stories to imagine for us those fires burning that can create miracles in our world.
Today, Ba'al Shem Tov is a combination of a real person and a myth. And this combination works for somebody who doesn't know a real person. We know about Ba'al Shem Tov only from the writings of his followers, but we know his great heritage, which is left with us. And his heritage came through his children, grandchildren, and followers.
The problem is that apart from a few letters, whose authenticity has been questioned, although we probably believe that at least a small number of them are genuine, and a whole load of legends about him that emerged in print more than 50 years after his death, and lots of quotations in his name by people who claim to have been his disciples, some of whom may have been directly his disciples, some of them might have been disciples of disciples, some of them we just don't know. We really had virtually nothing of the Ba'al Shem Tov himself. Now this kind of struggle to arrive at the historical Ba'al Shem Tov reached a moment of great euphoria when one scholar, now an American by origin, has been working in Israel for many years, Moshe Rossman, at some point in the 80s discovered what really is the only evidence of the existence of the Ba'al Shem Tov that comes from a contemporary source, and even better, not Jewish. In other words, a source that has no vested interest in recording the great figure that subsequently came to have this aura. And this was a simple reference, one line only, in a register of rents paid by the Jewish residents of the town of Mezhibozh, which is where the legend tells us the Ba'al Shem Tov spent the last 20 years of his life. He died in 1760. Recording the house where he lived. And he notes that there is a house where a man called Israel Ba'al Shem, Kabbalista, he's described as a Kabbalist, lives, and very significantly notes that this house is free from rent, or rather that the owner, the occupant of the house does not have to pay the rent. The Jewish community, the Kahal, pays the rent for him. And this was a bombshell when it was first discovered. First, because we had evidence that he existed, that for the last time dispelled the notion that he may not have existed at all. But it also contributed to a complete reevaluation of the kind of social class from which he emerged, because to tell us that the man was being supported, was a functionary of the Jewish community, was paid his rent in the same way in which the rabbi would have been paid his rent, the chazan, the cantor, several other functionaries of community were being paid by the community rather than having to pay it themselves, suggests that he was a member of the elite leadership group of the community.
So to actually have documentation that he existed, that the community supported him, and his home paid parsonage for his home and for his children, and to find out that Mezhibozh wasn't this hick town in the middle of nowhere, but it was actually a transitional point from east to west. So that gives us a sense of actually the recognition of who he was in his lifetime.
Of course, one of the questions people sometimes say, is the quest for the historical Ba'al Shem Tov. It's very hard to know who he was, and we attribute to him. And perhaps what's most important is that he inspired so many other people, that he stood for something. It doesn't matter if historically he said this, but people understood him this way. And so in a sense, it's the image, the inspiration of the Ba'al Shem Tov that's more important than the historical figure. And what he inspired was something extraordinary.
So we are in Bratslav, the home of Rabbi Nachman for most of his life until he went to Uman at the end of his life. And here we are in the beautiful hills above the river where I imagine Rabbi Nachman used to go for mikveh, and near the woods where he would go for hitbodedut, to be alone in the forest and open his heart and cry out to God. And here we are walking towards the burial site of Rabbi Natan. Wow, so here we are walking into the Ohel, into the building that houses these two graves. This one is Rabbi David Tzvi, and he was the grandson of Rabbi Natan, and this is Rabbi Natan's grave here. Po Niftar, here lies Rabbi Natan bar Rabbi Naftali, the son of Rabbi Naftali. And Rabbi Natan really carried a huge responsibility for carrying the legacy and the teaching of his spiritual teacher, Rabbi Nachman. As we were driving into Bratslav this morning, I just was imagining Rabbi Nachman and his students, his Hasidim here, and a nigun came to me that's attributed to him. So we're now in the village of Mezhibozh, just very close to the cemetery, and this is the actual synagogue of the Ba'al Shem Tov. At least it's on the same site, and they've reconstructed it pretty much as it would have been in the Ba'al Shem Tov's time. So it's kind of beautiful, I guess. So let's go and look. Let's go and see what it's all about. Wow, here we are. This is amazing. This is maybe in this very, very spot, the Ba'al Shem Tov and his other students would actually be leading the prayer services.
Because the Ba'al Shem Tov said, God said to Noah, Bo ata v'chol beitcha el hateva. Come, you and all your household, into the ark. Except that same word, teva, in Rabbinic Hebrew, means word. So the Ba'al Shem Tov said, God says to us, come, bring your whole household into the word. Don't leave part of you outside. Come into the word with your whole household. And then he said, make windows in the ark, make a second and third story in the ark. Make windows in the word. Let the sun shine into the word.
He says, the verse that says, Noach, now you enter into the ark, is a call for each one of us to enter into the word of prayer. That we could actually see the word as like a home, as a lifeboat, so to speak. And there's a first and second and third floor. We enter into the word of prayer. When we pray, we enter into it. It surrounds us. It holds us. We're in love with it. It is in love with us. And in the word is a mystical world. In the word is an angel. In the word is ultimately divine experience. So you go from these stages of kind of feeling that this is a universe, the word. And words are so important in Kabbalah. And then as you go a little deeper, you feel there are mystical beings that are contained within the world. And then finally, you just kind of lose everything, and there's oneness. The word is no longer a word. You are no longer you. It's only one. There's only one. And that's the ultimate goal of the Dveikut, is the unity of the merging with divine for that moment. And that's one of the Ba'al Shem Tov's teachings on Dveikut.
There's something about the way in which they've reconstructed this that really creates an atmosphere. We've got the cast iron candle holders there. You can imagine the candles burning all hours of the night, and you can imagine the fervent study and prayer of the Hasidim and of the Ba'al Shem Tov. Just, you can see them.
And prayer became also a way of expressing one's emotions, expressing the yearning, the longing, the hope, the despair, the despondency, the sense of feeling overwhelmed. What do? You go to the synagogue and pray, you go in the field and pray, you sit by yourself and you pray with other people. But prayer is a way for that. And I think the fact that people had such strong passions. They were so emotional that in fact it deepened their prayer. It's a different kind of prayer when you pray out of despondency or ecstasy. It's different when you're very emotional. And that's what Hasidism understood also. So the prayer was a gift, and the emotions were a gift to the prayer.
I relearned to pray reading the Ba'al Shem Tov. I relearned to pray because I was no longer talking to the old fellow in the sky. I was talking to something different. And prayer came to be about opening the heart. It came not talking to God primarily, but opening the heart. And the Ba'al Shem Tov understood that was the job. Yeah.
It's a powerful space. Yet again, I feel like, as I've said, the Ba'al Shem Tov exists in, here we are searching for the Ba'al Shem Tov, searching all over the Ukraine for the Ba'al Shem Tov and the remnants of his descendants, his spiritual descendants, his physical descendants, but where do we really find the Ba'al Shem Tov? Perhaps inside our own hearts and inside our own imaginations, allowing us to connect to some force beyond ourselves that may or may not be the Ba'al Shem Tov. But I think it doesn't matter, there's just something very powerful.
The Ba'al Shem Tov begins with an ancient teaching that the end of knowledge is no knowledge. Right? That is to say, at the end of our knowledge, we realize that we know nothing. He says, well, if so, then why do we even make the attempt? Why do we go on the path of knowledge, meaning knowledge of God, when at the end of the day, at the end of the road, we know we're going to come to the conclusion that we don't know? I like to think of, let's say, families. And let's say someone has a child. Someone has a daughter, let's say. And I meet someone on the street who I've never met before and who doesn't know any member of my family. And I say, do you know my daughter? And that person would honestly say, no, I just met you. I don't know your daughter at all. Okay, so that's stage one. Now stage two is, let's say you ask a dad, ask the typical dad about, or mom, about their child. You say, Dad, Mom, do you know your child? Do you know your daughter? Well, let me tell you what I would say. I would say I would just look heavenward. I would take a deep breath. I would sigh, and I would say, no, I don't know my daughter. There's just so much depth. There's so much grace. There's so much surprise. I don't know my daughter. And the Ba'al Shem Tov says it's exactly like that with God. At the end of the day, you're going to honestly say, I don't know God. The whole purpose of the religious path is to go from the first, I don't know your daughter, or I don't know this person, to the second, I don't know my daughter, I don't know God. Both people honestly say, I don't know God, but the second one doesn't know God from a place of so much more immense richness and sweetness and joy and love and intimacy and connection. And it's precisely the intimacy, the connection, that enables that person to say honestly, I don't know God.
One of the early teachings I heard was we gather the 4 tzitzis together, the 4 fringes on our garments together before we say the Shema, because you have to be a whole self before you can love God. Before you can proclaim God one, you have to be one. So you take the 4 corners of yourself and bring them all together, and you become one, and then you can proclaim God one. I think that was sort of bedrock for me, that it wasn't about, it was about stopping the war against yourself, that God needed to be served with joy and with wholeness. And I had been in quite a war against myself. I knew all about that. And so somebody who understood that healthy religion should liberate people from guilt rather than piling more guilt on them. So much of religion, so much of religious behavior is about inducing guilt and playing on people's need for guilt. And the Ba'al Shem Tov wanted to lift that burden. When he said that one of the things the evil urge tries to do is to get you to worry about your sins. You commit a little sin, and it makes you worry about your sins, and that worry keeps you far from God. And that's a trick of the Baldavar, that's a trick of the evil one who wants to keep you far from God. So the best thing to do is decide you won't do that again and then go back and serve God with love and joy. That was very important and healing and wholesome teaching for me.
He said, imagine how much God believed in us to create a world and hand it over to us. The God of faith is the God that believed in us enough to create a world and then hand it over to us. And I think about that when thinking about the Ba'al Shem Tov. He was a master who trusted us enough and believed in us enough to hand over the secrets of Kabbalah to us.
You see, Kabbalah by the 18th century had become such an overcomplicated symbol system that it was ready to crash. It just died under its own weight because nobody could master all that technical stuff. And I think the Ba'al Shem Tov starts out in this world of being a Mekubal and realizes somehow that simplicity is more important than high-tech Kabbalah. And so he lets it crash and burn and goes for the very simple place. There's his universe, that the universe gets so crowded with deities and angels and principalities and so on, that your heart's relationship to God can't get through because there's so many wait stations and so many stops along the way. That's what happens in Lurianic Kabbalah. You have so many little permutations and combinations to do, you can't just open your heart to God. So when the Ba'al Shem teaches that that the Kabbalists used to know all kinds of secret paths to God, but now we've forgotten them. That's like the king who had a treasure he wanted to give to his child, but was very careful of it, locked it up in a complicated box with locks and locks, and then put it in the treasure room with more locks, and we've lost the key. So what can you do? All you can do is smash the box. So all we can do is break our heart, and then all the kavanot, all the intentions come in on their own. So a broken heart is all God needs.
The Zlocheva Magid was a Karuv, an in-law of the Ba'al Shem Tov, and one of his closest students. And he was also a Ba'al Menagim. He composed nigunim. And there was one nigun in particular Ba'al Shem Tov took a liking to. On his deathbed, the Ba'al Shem Tov, and there were just very few people close to him that were there as the Ba'al Shem Tov on Shavuos was passing away, passing into the next world. And he turned to the Zlocheva Magid and he asked him to sing that nigun. And the Magid sang the nigun. The Ba'al Shem Tov turned to him and said, those of my family who will sing this nigun after my passing, I will come and join them. I will answer their prayers. I will be a part of them.
Ya da da di da, ya da 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 di da, ya da da di da da, ma da 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 da, ya da da di da, ya da da di da, ya da da di da da, ah da 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 da.
Tiridai na da da ma da da. Ay da na da 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 da. Tiridai da na da ma na da da. Ay da na da ma da da da.
Ya na na na. Ta na na ya na na na. Ta na ya na na na. Ta na na ya na da da.
La da 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 da. La 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 la. La la la. Lie, la, lie, la, lie, 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 la, 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 die, 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 lie, 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 die, la, 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 lie, lie, lie. Wow, you can see it's together. The tears are tears of sadness and happiness. Happiness that I'm able to be a Jew, to be a rabbi, and to be a Jew of the 21st century. And I think emotions, it's also about Judaism. Emotions are also about being human. I'm not afraid of my tears, and I'm not ashamed, because God gives us big presents, love and tears. I'm using them in full length. This is where melodies and stories are helping us.
We're told that the tzaddik lives even in death. That one part goes up, tachas kisei hakavod, to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, God Himself. One part stays by the kever, and the other part is the connection, goes back and forth. And that's why we go to pray, to daven at Kivrei Tzaddikim, the graves of the Tzaddikim, because we do believe that they can intercede on our behalf.
I also think it can be a time to be reminded, perhaps, more importantly, not only to ask something of the tzaddik, but to be challenged by being at that grave, to think about what this person might want from you and might say to you. Because, of course, the Rebbe did only listen with compassion, but also told you sometimes what you need to do to change your life, to live a better life. So there's a challenge that comes as well.
What you'll experience depends upon lots of different things, but my bracha would be to you that you should experience a fulfillment and a hatzlocha, a strength and a chazaka, a chizuk, to continue your work and to bring these concepts to greater Klal Yisrael, people of Israel.
So this is it. This is where the Ba'al Shem Tov is buried. Po nifta, here lies Rabbi Israel Ba'al Shem Tov HaKodesh, the holy Ba'al Shem Tov. I can really feel the holiness of this place. There's a lot of really powerful energy here. I feel like whatever the historical truth might be about this man, he has opened my heart in different ways and given me space for a different kind of Judaism, a different kind of Jewish experience. And I just have so many images in my imagination, in my heart, of just him in the forest dancing, and just what he represents for me and for so many Jewish people of all denominations and persuasions, and it feels like an amazing moment.